In this video, you will learn 4 basic embroidery stitches. Pictured here is everything you need for embroidering. You will cut your embroidery floss about an arm's length or shorter, and then split it so that you are only going to use 3 threads. So embroidery floss comes with 6 strings wound together. And for this project, we are only using 3. So you split it in half, and then save the half that you don't use to use later when you run out of string. Pull it apart very slowly and carefully so it doesn't tie itself into a knot. And then on one end, you will tie a knot. And I am doing the booger knot really quickly for you. You can see how to do that awesome knot in a different video. Then on the other end of the embroidery floss, you will thread your needle. So embroidery needles have a large eye, but it's still kind of tricky to get 3 threads in there. So make a little loop at the end, and if you thread the little loop through the eye, it goes a lot faster. I'm sorry you can't see that very well on this video. And then you will just leave that end dangling. So you go in from the back of your fabric so that the knot is on the back. And then you make your first stitch. Small stitches are ideal, and try to keep the length of the stitches uniform throughout. So to do this first stitch, which is called the back stitch, you think of it as 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So I've already done 2 stitches here. Now you place your stitch, your needle will come out for the length of the next stitch, and it kind of jumps forward from the back, and then you go backwards and fill it in on the front. So that is why it's called the back stitch, because you're kind of jumping 2 steps forward from the back side of the fabric, and then you go backwards on the front side of the fabric, like so. Remember to keep your stitch lengths uniform in size, and the smaller the better. You don't want to go too big on the length of your stitches, or that is just bad craftsmanship and it doesn't look very good. When you get to the end, you just do your last stitch and flip your piece over. And then to tie a knot, you go underneath the last stitch you did. Make a little loop, don't pull it tight, go through the loop with your needle, and you have 1 knot, and then you do it twice to make a double knot. And then you have a nice secure knot, and you can cut your string. Just like so. Try and keep the back nice and tidy also. Now we're going to do the chain stitch. So look how I do this. I hold the thread off to the left-hand side with my left thumb. I am right-handed, so if you're left-handed, this will be opposite. But as I do that stitch, I make sure that the thread is going to go behind the needle. So I'll do it again here. Hold the thread off to the left-hand side, go into the little chain that you just made where your last stitch came out. You kind of mark the length of your stitch, then make sure the thread is behind the needle and pull it through. So here we go again, going into that chain, mark the length of the stitch, make sure the thread's behind the needle and pull it through, and you get that nice chain. It's going to be a thicker line than your back stitch line. Do it one more time so you can see. And sorry, I hit the camera with my arm, but there you go. When you get to the end of your chain stitch row, you just put your needle through the top of that last chain stitch, Pull your thread through to the back and then tie your knot just like you did the last knot that you did. That's how you will tie all of your knots. Make sure your knots are on the back side of your fabric. And that will help the craftsmanship look really awesome. Tie that knot lickety split. Now we're on to the blanket stitch. So the blanket stitch is a little trickier to explain because you're creating these little prongs kind of coming off of the side. So you'll notice I drew 2 lines for this. That is optional, but it does help to make sure your prongs are all going to be the same length. All right, so you saw me do one. Let me try to explain it. Your needle goes in where the end of the prong is going to be and comes out where you're going to have your straight line going across. Make sure that that embroidery floss is kind of hooked behind where your needle comes out. So see, the needle's going to come out here, the embroidery floss is under it, and that hooks it so that I can create that little L shape. Basically, you're just making a little L shape with each stitch. And it gives you a nice decorative edging, or not necessarily an edging. You could do this somewhere on your piece if this is a stitch that you need. But it is usually used for decoration around the edge of a blanket or the edge of a button. So to finish it, you just go in through where that last stitch came out, just right next to it, not into the same hole. Go onto the back, and that's what the back will look like, and then tie your knot just like you tied the knots for the last 2. And now we're on to the satin stitch. This is the last stitch we'll do. Satin stitch, you're just going to fill the area with color. So whatever shape you drew, you're going to start filling it. So start on a narrow end. That's what I recommend. And it's a simple stitch because you're just going around and around and around. But the tricky part with the satin stitch is getting your threads to be close enough together so that the fabric behind it does not show through at all. And sometimes you have to go back and kind of fill in a gap. But try and get them close together in the first place. I use my thumb like that to smooth it out, make sure that no fabric is showing through. And then just around and around and around. Another tricky thing is if you have straight sides, trying to get those edges on the right and left hand side to be even and smooth, because sometimes they can look kind of rough and jagged. So I'm just going to go around and around and around. Also be careful you don't bunch up your fabric, so you don't want to pull it tight. You're just kind of laying the thread across that shape that you're filling in. And the back of your fabric is going to look the same as the front. So I stopped kind of short on my shape because I ran out of thread. Ideally, I would finish that, but you can see that the satin stitch fills in that space like so. And now you're done with your boot camp. You can turn that in for all your points and start on your project.